for sure.
Awesome. Okay. So if you want to just start by saying like who you are, what you do, that would be great.
Sure. So I am Dan Ingleman. I am a farrier, originally from New York State, a Morrisville graduate, and just recently moved to Central Illinois to reopen my business here and be a little bit more centrally located in the draft horse business, which is kind of the area that I like to occupy and specialize in.
Okay, so you said the draft horse business, that's why you kind of relocated.
hmm
Awesome. And what's the name of your business? Are you keeping the same name that you had in New York?
Yes, it's currently Ingleman Forge and Farrier.
Awesome, cool. So, what training did you have to go through to become a farrier, and where did you go to do that training?
So I attended school at Cornell University. They have what they call their practical horseshoeing certificate program. It's a 12-week program. There's about 50 horseshoeing schools throughout the United States in various states. Another very common popular one is the one held at Oklahoma State University. Of course, there's Cornell. Cornell is actually the oldest horseshoeing program in the US. There's a couple out west, up throughout the Pacific Northwest, and there's a few up and down the East Coast as well.
Awesome.
But a lot of people, they'll typically go to Cornell or they'll typically go to Oklahoma. But again, there's a couple of different programs. So I applied to the school, got accepted, and before I had went, I had worked with my farrier who I had growing up. I had just kind of gone to some barn calls with him, shadowed. He kind of taught me some of the basics and I learned to trim my own horses. And then obviously the biggest crash course and learning curve was in school. And then from there, once I was out of that program, that was about I finished 5 years ago. So then from there, I kind of did like a mini apprenticeship. Some farriers choose to go right from school into private practice. Other farriers they'll go out and do an apprenticeship that could last anywhere between 1 to 4 years, depending on their preference and kind of their learning style and where they want to go with it. With another, obviously more experienced farrier. Um, and then they can, if they choose, in the US, we have three levels of certification through the American Farriers Association, CF, which is certified farrier, up to certified journeyman farrier. So a lot of individuals who want to go for kind of more of those certifications and the testing, a lot of them will do more of kind of like a rigorous apprenticeship program for preparation for that testing.
Cool. So, how long was the Cornell program?
It was a 12-week program. It ran from April to August, and they run three 12, yeah, three 12-week programs a year.
Okay.
So basically every 4 months they start a new program. So they do a
Okay.
spring, summer, and fall.
Awesome. And so for the certifications, that's nationwide then. The cert.
Yes. So it's kind of a debatable topic or highly debated, if you want to say that, within the farrier circle about whether in the US we should have mandatory certification. So overseas in Europe, the United Kingdom, Britain, Germany, any European country, you have to be certified. It's almost like being an RN in the US. You have to pass a board, you have to do a minimum of a 5 year apprenticeship with another farrier after completing schooling. It's very, very tightly controlled and monitored. And if you are caught practicing farrier work overseas without that licensure and that certification, you can actually go to prison for it and be fined and that sort of thing. So similarly, if you were, caught lying to be an RN in the US and working without a license, you'd be in some trouble for that. So one of the differences, though, the European countries are a lot smaller than the United States and Canada. So it's a little bit easier to kind of track and to monitor. So there's always been this great discussion since the inception of the American Farriers Association. There is another association as well, and they both kind of do the same thing, but it's almost like being a USEF.
Yeah.
It's not a requirement to join, but since the AFA, I believe they were founded in like the 80s or 90s, it's really just kind of become like a home base for everybody who wants to be involved and have a membership. There's so many opportunities for education, continued education, clinics. It's just a great networking tool for farriers all over the US. But with that being said, there is no strict certification guidelines within the US stating that you must be certified to be a farrier. It is typically recommended that farriers do go for the CF, the CJF if they so choose, just because you can never know too much. It really can help to have those letters after your name,
Mm.
just as far as being as educated as you can be in our field. Um, but with that being said, because of the size of the US, it is just so much more difficult. And also, it's never been done to kind of police and have that required certification and boards and that sort of thing. So, a lot of farriers, in a way, we almost self regulate ourselves. If you're not a good farrier and you're not practicing your continuing education and really trying to do a good job by the horse, you can't really grow a business. So, farriers who don't make it kind of weed themselves out in that way. So that's always kind of been the argument discussion over the
Yeah,
required certification.
that was like my next question. So if they don't need the certification to become a farrier, as a prospective or future trainer, barn manager, how do you kind of vet farriers before they come into your barn? What are some maybe questions or things that you should ask a farrier before they come in and do any work on your horses?
Definitely, you can always ask for credentials if they went to school. Now, of course, again, you don't have to go to school officially in the US. Anybody can go out and buy a rasp and a nippers and say they're a farrier. Um, you can always ask if they went to school, if they do hold any certification or accreditation through the AFA. You can ask for, probably some references. Social media, of course, is really opened that up. There's so many discussion boards and groups within regions of the country. You can go on there and ask for farrier recommendations, and we'll say the Morrisville area, and you'll get, probably a whole litany of responses with different farriers and that sort of thing. Um, Really, I would say, though, definitely any sort of schooling, any sort of certification, not that that necessarily makes you a great farrier. There certainly are individuals who have gone out, they didn't do any schooling, they might have just done an apprenticeship, they might have kind of learned along their way. Maybe another family member was a farrier and they just kind of grew up around it. And they could be perfectly great farriers. But a lot of really serious, career farriers, they do go for those certifications. They have gone to official schooling. Um, and also, too, you can always ask, if you're working in a particular discipline, we'll say reining horses, jumpers, that sort of thing. You can kind of talk with a farrier and just see what their experience is. Do they have more experience just doing trims? Are they comfortable shoeing more performance horses? There are farriers who specialize, we'll say, pretty much in only shoeing what we call long-footed or saddle seat horses with the show package and the long foot. So if you have a farrier who is, maybe their main experience and they've really honed their craft in that area, it might not be your first choice if you have a reining program. Not to say they couldn't do, a good job, but again, typically once they kind of get into some of that more specialized area, or those more specialized areas, I should say, they might not, they just get used to, a certain way. And there's so many differences in length of foot and how it affects performance and how the horses are shod from discipline to discipline. Um, Another good resource too, for instance, people in the central New York area will say you can call the farrier program at Cornell, and you can speak with Steve, who's the current instructor, who is my instructor as well, and he has been shoeing horses for over 50 years, and I think he might know just about every farrier in the country. country. So if you called them up and said, "Hey, Steve, I have a hunter jumper training program. I'm looking for a new farrier," he could probably give you five references of people in the area that he would. So really just doing, kind of research, just asking around, different people, other trainers in the area who they use. And again, kind of trying to find somebody with the experience. And if you do specialize in a discipline, somebody who might have that particular experience, just because horses are shot a little bit differently, obviously, from reining to a show jumper. They're slightly different, just the shoes we use and kind of how we might do things.
Definitely. Awesome. Those are some good resources. As a whole, is there a shortage of farriers in New York, in the country? Is it something that we have enough of? I know, like with the vets, we're seeing less and less people going into equine for vet. How is that in the farrier world?
I'd say there definitely is a shortage, kind of like most specialized trades like veterinary medicine. There is definitely, I think, a decline in numbers. A lot of our farriers that do have who've been doing it for a long time, obviously they're an aging population. So as they're phasing out and retiring, we kind of lose more people every year that way. Um, in most places, I would say there is probably more work than there is actual farriers to make it all happen. So if somebody is interested in going into the industry, um, very likely as they develop their skills, they could probably build up a very fairly pretty busy business, kind of no matter where they go in this
Yeah.
country, I'd say. I know
Awesome.
even in central New York, there's even quite a shortage of farriers, and even down into like north central Pennsylvania, like the Scranton area, there aren't many farriers. Out here in the Midwest, there's not a tremendous amount. Again, it's such a niche and kind of like a specialized trade that um, there just isn't always the available resources, which in one way is good for farriers in the business. You'll likely never be without work, but unfortunately, it can kind of create a bottleneck for horse owners who need a farrier. But
Yeah, definitely. And so you always known you wanted to be a farrier? When did you kind of decide you wanted to go into that type of work? And then second part of that, you specialize in draft horses. Where did that come from? Do you have experience with draft horses? Give us a little background on that.
sure, so I never knew that I wanted to be a farrier. I've always done horses growing up. Always been around them. Obviously, always knew the importance of having a farrier. And when I left Morrisville, I had gotten into the human resources field. So I was doing human resources, I was a recruiter at a couple of different places, and that just wasn't quite what I wanted to do. It definitely helped with resume building, but as far as um, you know, interest level, it just wasn't really there. So in 2018, one of my horses actually developed laminitis. And in treating that, working with my vet and my farrier, I thought, oh, well, this is, kind of interesting. And I seem to have an interest in this, and I've always been around it. And at that time, I had wanted to do a career change out of human resources. So
Okay.
um, started riding with my farrier, and I thought, well, this is cool. I'll probably always have a horse, so even if I don't do this professionally and have a big career, I'll always be able to shoe my own horse, and just kind of help keep that cost down of ownership. But from there, it kind of grew. Like I said, I went back to school, got out of school. I took a job. I worked for a few months at Root and Riddle Equine Clinic up in Saratoga Springs. They have Root and Riddle as a whole. Their main practice is based in Lexington, Kentucky. They have a podiatry department. So within their podiatry department, they have several veterinarians who specialize in the distal limb, so lower leg and the hoof of the horse. A lot of them are certified journeyman farriers, in addition to being veterinarians. And then under each of the podiatrists is a team of farriers who go out and the vet will kind of do like that initial treatment, that initial surgery, and then the farriers they'll go out and they will service the horses back at the farm once they're back home for recovery. And then two, they also just offer general farrier services as well as a clinic. So the farriers are kind of responsible for their caseload through the hospital. So I worked up there for a brief time. That was a super cool experience. I learned a ton there. Um, and then I ended up coming back to Buffalo, got back into human resources for a while, still did my farrier work. And then about 2 years ago, I decided to kind of take the leap from working for someone else and then opened my own business and kind of went more of the self-employed route. As far as the draft horses go, I got involved in the draft horse program at Morrisville while I was there. And that love and passion for the draft horses never left. I'd always been involved with driving horses growing up. So when I got into Morrisville, got into the draft horses. That really kind of felt like my niche. And then when I left, again, it never went away. I always wanted to be on the road with a hitch and showing draft horses. So when I was at Cornell, I was close enough to Morrisville. I had reached out to Scott Seymour, who runs the draft horse program, of course. And I had said, "Hey, Scott, I'm really interested in learning how to shoe draft show horses." And it was summertime. I did the summer program, which if anybody ever does go to Cornell, I would highly recommend doing the winter program because in that shop, when you have 5 students with forges running in August, it's like 120 degrees in there. So 10 out of 10 recommend the winter program if anybody's interested in attending. But anyhow, it was summertime. So he had the horses going on the road. They were shod to show. So I said, "Can I come out and help you?" And he said, "Yeah, of course. I'll never turn down any extra help." So I went out, helped Scott, helped him pull shoes, reset the hitch geldings. And then there was another farrier who was coming into the central New York area to work on a couple of hitches within New York. He's from Michigan, so he travels a lot, or he did at the time. He's no longer shoeing, but he specialized in just shoeing the draft show horses. So he was coming to town, and Scott had offered to get me in contact with him, and I did, and I went out and I helped him for a couple of days. And then that put me back in contact with some people who now I've helped for the last 5 years. When not shoeing, I was on the road with them as their groom, and we showed a 6 horse hitch of Percherons, and we traveled the country and just had a good old time. So part of the reasoning for me wanting to get into the shoeing was to somehow find a way to get back involved in draft horses, and that I guess has paid off like tenfold. So
Yeah, it's really interesting how all those times that you were willing to go out and work for someone, maybe not paid, but just to get the experience, that kind of sounds like it opened a lot of doors for you into what you do today, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. I think especially I'm sure in any industry, but especially in the horse business, knowing, having a connection, having a foot in the door can really make or break you. And it's so funny. I look back like 5 years ago when I finished the program at Cornell, and really, in the grand scheme of things, hardly knew anything. Not that we're not always learning in this field. I still don't feel like I don't know much some days, but um, to be where I'm at now, I was like, wow, that's really pretty crazy. And just like that one window that opened happened to open so many doors. And that's actually part of what brought me out here to the Midwest was through that initial connection I had made all those years ago, really originally from going to Morrisville and being involved with the draft program, has now led me to have clientele here clear across the country. Some of my dearest friends are in the draft horse industry. Really, it's become like a second family. And again, by being willing to go out and help another farrier, like you said, really kind of like blew the door off the hinges in a way I never would have imagined. So in any industry again, but I think especially within the horse business, it is so niche, but the people that are here and have done it, they're so willing to teach really, and to kind of pass along that knowledge if you're willing to learn, whether you want to be a trainer, a farrier, whatever you want to do. I think it's so important to put yourself out there and to really try and network and offer to ride along with somebody for a day, offer to groom at a horse show, even if you don't get paid, just you never know who you're going to meet there. and where that might take you.
So true. So you were saying you do like continuing education and different things to keep kind of relevant on industry standards and things like that. I know you've only kind of you're younger in the industry, but what have you seen maybe some changes in the industry even since the time you graduated from Cornell or anything like along those lines as far as management techniques that we should be thinking about as stable managers, anything along those lines?
Sure. So there's definitely always been a continued push for that continued education within the ferry industry. There are so many farriers who are so passionate about what we do. And those individuals, they've got involved at the AFA. Every year in January in Cincinnati, there's what they call the Hoof Care Summit. And it is, I don't know, I think it's 5 days. It's a 5 day long, essentially, summit of healthcare professionals, veterinarians, farriers, product reps. People come from all over the globe, farriers from all over the globe. Everybody kind of descends upon Cincinnati. There's a big trade show, lectures, anatomy labs, dissections, really cool stuff. And it's really the camaraderie within the industry, I think, has really changed a lot in that we are better together versus these are my clients, those are your clients. I really think that, and I hope it continues to go that way. Again, a lot of the people in this industry, but just from working with horsemen from all breeds, all disciplines, especially those that have been in it a long time, they are usually very willing to share their experiences. And if you're willing to go and be willing to work and be willing to learn, they will give you all that they can. Um, so with that, I think some other things to consider and that have changed are, I would say, almost from like a nutritional standpoint. You know, our nutritional science is always changing, and I have a little slogan kind of like Smokey the Bear says, only you can prevent wildfires. I always say only we can prevent nutritionally induced laminitis.
Mm.
Laminitis is can be caused by a wide array of things: a high fever, an infection, a mare who has retained even a very small shred of her placenta. There is what we call mechanical founder, which is a founder that is induced, we'll say, by a horse being worked too hard on a hard surface like blacktop, that sort of thing. So a lot of different things can contribute to laminitis, which I've seen a lot of. I think a lot of farriers do, a lot of veterinarians do within our modern horses, partly from a management standpoint, and also to just the way that we make our feeds, the way that we make our hay, and I think also some environmental changes that go along with that as well. So, for instance, last summer in Western New York, where I was previously living, in other parts of New York State as well. I'm sorry, the summer before, so summer of 2023, we had a drought during, not quite a drought. It wasn't, I guess, officially a drought, but very dry weather when everyone was cutting and baling first cutting hay. And it was like the perfect 2 week window of absolutely no precipitation, very low humidity. Farmers were making hay in like May, which I know you grew up very close to where I did. That's almost unheard of in our neck of the woods. And so, rightfully so, everyone is out making all of their hay, all the hay they could. But on the flip side of that, because of the environmental conditions, the sugar within the hay was so high within that first cutting that a lot of horses were having issues with laminitis on first cutting hay, which is typically not the case. Usually you have horses that can have nutritionally induced laminitis from too rich of feed, too rich of second cutting, things like that. So it was really weird how, your typical, your easy keepers, your older horses that don't need a lot, I'll toss him a flake of first cutting. That's all he needs. My horses, even, they had laminitis issues. They're older. They have some metabolic issues, insulin resistance, insulin dysregulation. And I couldn't figure out where these issues were coming from. And then we started testing the hay, and the sugar was sky high in the first cutting. But by second cutting, by the time second cutting had rolled around, the environmental factors had tapered off. We've gotten some more rain, the sugar had dropped, that sort of thing. So as I think we do continue to see some environmental and kind of climate changes and just changes in our weather patterns in certain areas, I think that that also all contributes to, I think that we'll see more issues, I should say, with laminitis, things that are associated with that through the hay, through the feed that we're making.
That's so interesting you bring this up. So we just finished talking about laminitis and hoof-related lamenesses. So we just examined on that, but now we're talking about nutrition. And just last
Hmm.
class, we were talking about how every year the hay is different, depending on weather conditions. And, we farm, my
Absolutely.
husband and I, and yeah, it's just every year the crop is different, the management's going to be different. It's the same thing with the hay. So that was awesome to hear that you're seeing that as well. And it's going to be an increasing problem with the more weather changes that we see, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that even too falls down to, and this can kind of branch out into a larger discussion about equine management and husbandry, but even sugars and grasses in our horses' pastures are totally dependent on the weather, the time of year. Sugar is lower in grass at nighttime. So if you have older metabolic, we'll say brood mares, maybe they're not doing a whole lot. It's usually better to pasture them at night because the sugar in the grass is lower if you do pasture them. Knowing your horses, knowing what suits them best, keeping them in a healthy weight. Horses, as they age with metabolic dysregulation, anything like Cushing's disease, which is pretty common, any sort of insulin resistance, a lot of these signs and symptoms start to appear in a really fatty, crusty neck, fat pockets over the hind quarters, over the shoulders. Horses that don't fully shed out their coat, they might grow a very thick coat, things like that. That horses, similarly to people, as we age, our metabolism slows down. We don't process sugar as well. Our thyroids might change, might become either overactive or underactive or cease working altogether. So obviously, as we age, we have to adjust our diets and taking care of ourselves. Well, it's the same way with our horses. There are also a lot of breeds that are prone to just genetically prone to metabolic dysregulation. Morgans, Arabians, Andalusians, Lusitanos, some draft horses, quarter horses to a degree, thoroughbreds almost never. That's not to say it doesn't happen, but it almost kind of all pony breeds, I swear, they're all going to founder at some point in time of their life if you don't monitor them to an inch of their life. So by having those breeds, let's say you specialize in training Arabians or breeding Arabians, as you start to get older stock, you might start to see issues in your older brood mares, your retired show horses, geldings, because they're castrated, they have already almost a hormonal imbalance without that testosterone. So they are more prone to developing Cushing's later on in life, and things like that. So there's so many factors that go into good husbandry, good management practices. Unfortunately, I think the days of just putting your horse out on pasture are over. And I think that's almost a double-edged sword because one, our feed and our nutrition knowledge and science has gotten so great. We've never had better feed in this country for or in the world for anybody, humans, animals, dogs, cats, horses, whatever. But so many horses that are not in a very high performance or breeding capacity do not need these very intense diets, tremendous amounts of feed, all these supplements, good hay, plus being out on pasture. A lot of it too, again, is going to depend on where your hay is made. If the field has been fertilized, the nutrition in that hay, the sugar levels. So it all kind of really comes down to, well, I guess a whole lot of factors that need to be taken into consideration. And again, I think the days of just my horse lives out on pasture and he's never had an issue, I think unfortunately are over as you do get into fertilizing pasture, having very lush pasture, those really nutritious feeds. Yeah, times are changing. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. It just requires us, I think, to look at some management a little bit differently than how it might have historically been done.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see here where we're at. Um, so you talked a little bit, you were at Rood and Riddle. There was a farrier team under each vet. Do you want to talk about just how you as a farrier have relationships with vet? Maybe sometimes you guys collaborate on care, what that looks like for the horse owner, barn manager.
Absolutely. So vet farrier collaboration is very, very big. I work with vets on all manner of cases. Could be lameness, could be laminitis, which I guess technically be a lameness, but my vets that I work with and work closely with, they're able to get they're able to do blood work, they're able to do imaging. If I get a horse, a new client horse will say, or any horse that is either developing laminitis, or I know it has a history of it, or I'm taking on a new case where the horse has foundered before. I don't do anything as far as chewing treatment, anything goes until we have an updated set of radiographs taken by the vet. Um, with those radiographs, I get them sent over to me, and then I will look at them. I will send them to other farriers. I'll send them to my instructor at Cornell and have him look at them. I'll send them to my personal vet who does my horses and get her opinion. I will work as much as I can with anybody who's willing to help. Again, especially our vets, they're able to do that imaging, they're able to do that blood work. And with that, we're kind of able to work together to create an appropriate treatment plan for a lame horse or a horse with laminitis or founder. Um, Having that vet, in kind of working with you is really good, because they can tell you the full history of the horse's health. If they've worked on the horse its entire life, that sort of thing. I'm able to call them up, and this is nothing against owners, but I think from my experience and from talking with other farriers, there's a big difference between people who are professional horsemen and professional horsewomen and people who have pet horses. So sometimes trying to treat the pet horses in the backyard, and prospective trainers run into this as well. Trying to treat and work with those horses, it can be really difficult to get the necessary information out of the owners just simply because they don't know. Again, it's their pet. They don't maybe compete. They don't have a lot of experience, what have you. But by being able to work with that vet, I can call up the vet and we can have a conversation, and they can tell me, oh no, actually the horse foundered every year for the last 3 years, and all this, versus the owner, you know, I don't know, the horse, miraculously, it only ever happened yesterday. Even though it's very clearly been ongoing for a very long time. So I really do like to rely on my vets. I do try and get them involved as much as possible. A lot of owners do like to call farriers first. If they do have a kind of like an acute lameness out of nowhere, which makes sense just because typically farriers don't charge as much of a farm call fee. A lot of times, if it is an abscess, obviously I can come out and take it out and we'll be good to go. Saves you that vet call. But if I show up and I find something that I can't quite figure out what's going on, or I think we need additional diagnostics or testing, at that point in time, I do really urge the owner to get the vet involved, and then we can all kind of work together in getting that horse headed in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like I've talked to, I don't know if you remember Alexis Carpenter. She's now Dr. Hall,
Hmm.
that, and we had
Hmm.
Tamara Brudnerick come in with massage therapy, and it's just like I feel like the way the industry is going, it's like this comprehensive care team for horses, especially high performance horses. It's not just the farrier and the vet occasionally throughout the year anymore. It's this big team collaborative work. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, definitely. So you talked about nutrition a little bit. Is there anything else as far as stable practices that you would give advice on to the students who are looking to maybe have manage their own facilities, have a training barn, things like that?
Absolutely. Good hoof care starts at home for sure. Some of the things I see a lot are when I go out to people's barns, horses that are in stalls for long periods of the day without enough dry bedding. That is the biggest thing I don't think anybody should ever skimp on. If you have horses in stalls, which a lot of our performance and show horses are, they must be bedded well in a dry, clean environment, meaning that that stall gets cleaned, certainly minimum one time a day. More than that is best, preferably twice when you go into feed. Do a deep clean in the morning, go through in the evening and pick. Get out a lot of that wet bedding, get out a lot of that manure, keep your horses in several inches of clean, dry bedding. It is going to just promote a healthier horse overall, whole system, respiratory, parasite load, but also to that hoof health. It's gonna really kind of promote a healthy, strong, hard hoof capsule. It's going to hold a shoe. If you have performance horses, you don't want them to have really shelly, poor hoof quality. I have been around horses, I've been working on them that they've been kept in too wet of an environment. Either they live out on pasture and it's a total swamp, or they live in a stall without enough dry bedding and they're just in constant moisture. And I can actually flex and bend the hoof wall just by my hand. Um, or by hand, I should say, which in your normal horse with a healthy hoof capsule, that's not possible. Um, so really, really clean facilities. Keep your stalls immaculate. Lots of bedding. Don't skimp on that. I don't think you should ever skimp on bedding or feed. You can skimp in other areas, but never compromise your nutrition with your horses, especially if you're a trainer, you have flying horses in. The clients will be willing to pay for high quality feed, use bedding, a lot of it. As far as turnout is considered, certainly do your best to ensure that they do have a dry, mud-free area as much as you can, especially if you're in the Northeast in the wintertime. I swear it's mud season 10 months out of the year. Do your best to install a drainage system. Gravel is your friend in paddocks. Keep horses off of super wet, soppy, soupy pastures. Not only is that better for your pasture, but also it's better for your horse and for the hoof health. Um, I highly recommend everybody have at least one dry lot in case they do have a horse that comes in with metabolic dysregulation, a horse who cannot be out on pasture, an older horse that shouldn't be out on pasture. So that way your horse can still get turnout time, and you can feed them hay outside, do whatever you got to do, but that way they cannot go out on that super lush pasture as well for rehabilitating horses coming off of a laminitis flare up. You don't want to put them back on a pasture because you're going to be right back in the same spot. So once that horse is healed enough that they can go out, it's really within everybody's best interest that that horse go out in the dry lot until they are either totally out of the woods or until, I mean, some horses live in a dry lot for their entire lives because, or as they age, they live in a dry lot. They can't go out in pasture. They will be sore-footed. They will have chronic bronchitis. So yes, dry lot, clean, dry stalls. Dry is the biggest thing here. Horses and moisture don't go well together as far as hoof health goes. Of course, again, being in the Northeast, we can't really get around it. It's tough, especially if you're just starting out as a new trainer with a new business and don't have a lot of money. Um, but if you can't, keep your horses in a super dry environment by bringing them in. Most, again, show horses live inside for most of the day, part of the day, whatever your management practice may be. Bring them in, hose them off, legs, feet, very thorough hosing. Not only does that help with skin health, preventing scratches and fungal infection, and then put them back in that clean, dry stall for a few hours. And that will help to draw a lot of the moisture out of their feet and keep that a little bit more balanced as well. Again, if you are able to have the perfect drained, leveled, excavated, graveled, dry lot paddock for the winter.
Yeah, so there's definitely things you can do, but like you said, don't skimp on dry and clean, right? Then things like this is
Absolutely.
so important. Yeah, we've talked about
Absolutely.
scratches, different fungal infections, and it always comes back to keeping the legs dry, keeping them clean, picking
Hmm.
feet out, right? General maintenance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And checking that stuff regularly too.
Yeah.
I have seen a lot of recurrent scratches. It almost seems to become like an autoimmune disease disorder, whatever you want to call it. If they don't, if it's allowed to go on too quickly or for too long, I should say, you really can't ever seem to get it to go away. It always comes back seasonally. It's almost like an allergic reaction to those environmental changes and those environmental stressors. So with that, by doing that daily leg washing, check under the fetlocks, especially if you have any sort of feathered breed, a Frisian, a Gypsy, a Clydesdale, they can grow so much stuff under there that once it really takes hold, it's really difficult to deal with. So I heard this from another farrier and I really liked it. Be conservative and treat often. So by with that, always checking up. So you can kind of catch some of those things like a thrush infection, scratches, that sort of thing. You can catch them early and get them treated versus this has been going on for several months now. It's totally out of control. Definitely prevention, almost like preventive maintenance on a vehicle,
Yeah.
is really the name of the game as far as ensuring good long-term health. But also, it's just going to help ensure that you can actually keep down some of your costs over time. In that, if you're able to monitor and prevent things when they're very early on, you don't necessarily get stuck with a big vet bill at the end because what was at one time a very small issue and could have easily been corrected has now gone on for 6 months, and now we need veterinary intervention to get that treated. Um, there too brings up another quick thing there about husbandry practices as far as turnout goes. Keeping your turnout as manure free as possible is another really big one. Um, I have found in my horses and other horses that I've dealt with um, that mud does not necessarily cause thrush. It is the manure and very soupy, mucky, manure-y conditions and turnout that contributes to that. I pick my paddocks. My horses, they're both older metabolic. They have insulin dysregulation. One has Cushing, so they live in a dry lot. I pick my paddocks twice a day, more than that if possible, just because I want to keep that manure out of there. I want to keep them from getting it packed into their feet and tracking over it all the time. And I never have any issues with thrush, even in mud season, because that manure is not there. So keeping a clean paddock and keeping a clean turnout environment is, I would say, just as important as keeping a clean stall. Obviously, if you have a 10-acre field, that's not quite as much of an issue because they're not as congested as maybe like a half or quarter acre size paddock, but going out and picking those paddocks every day, as often as you can. If you do it every day, it's a lot easier. Um, that is another huge contributor in hoof health as far as thrush goes. Certainly, quality of health of the skin, the heel bulbs, that sort of thing. I can always tell when I walk into somebody's barn their husbandry practices. It's all told in the feet. If horses live in dirty environments, their hoof wall itself is almost like this crusty, scaly, really nasty, unhealthy looking thing that I don't really want to touch. I always have work gloves with me, and I wear the work gloves in the really dirty places. And then my really clean barns, I never have to wear them because they're not like that. The heel bulbs look really inflamed and uncomfortable, chronic thrush infection, chronic scratches, and those are the people that have unclean paddocks. They don't use enough bedding. Their barn is dirty. That's the biggest thing. It's just keeping things clean. It doesn't have to be $1 million barn, but if you keep things clean, stay on top of things as they pop up, like scratches or thrush, it really can make a big difference in the quality of your horse's life, and their health, and I think even to their performance as performance horses, which as trainers, that's why people are sending you their horses.
Yeah. Yeah, I always try and tell the students like it's just the basic healthcare of the horses that you should be often focusing on. The simple things that are often overlooked. Doing an
Mhm.
exam when you're grooming, checking feet, things like that. Just like you said, the maintenance type things so you don't have this big blowout down the road of issues.
1,000,000%.
Yeah. Do you have any like one case or interesting horse case that kind of stands out to you? I know you've probably seen quite a few things, but is there anything that you want to kind of share with the students, like an interesting one or something maybe you're working on right now?
Sure. Yeah, I think I probably have a couple of those. One was, it was Morgan Gelding who I was working on. He was 17 years old. He had Cushing's disease, and he was the only horse in the US who has developed this, but he developed squamous cell carcinoma cancer that affected all four of his chestnuts and only his chestnuts. And it was a very freak, bizarre thing. The horse was being treated by our local vet. This was a case of collaborating with the vet. horse needed further treatment. The horse went for oncology treatment at Cornell. They were doing treatments, and the cancer treatment actually caused the horse to develop a laminitis episode. And I think the laminitis episode, coupled with his Cushing's disease, then resulted in a pretty severe case of founder. So this was a few years before I came on the case. The horse was being, managed, and then he would have an episode, and he'd be managed, he'd have an episode, and the cancer would come and go, and it was super freaky to see. The chestnuts looked like these little like rotting pieces of meat. They were like oozy and just the wildest thing. Um, so then I took over the horse, and the vet and she came out. We shot radiographs together. We put the horse in wooden clog shoes, which was kind of the historical treatment for horses with laminitis. And the concept of a clog is that it not only provides positive pressure on the foot side of the hoof capsule, so you're supporting P3, which is the bone that's compromised in a laminitis flare up episode, that sort of thing. But with that being said, um, the way that they're constructed and the way you can modify them with a grinder, it actually allows the horse to totally self-regulate where he wants to balance his foot
Mm.
for maximum comfort for the horse. So we pack between the hoof and the clog, we pack it with with dental impression material. So the same impression material they use to make a mold of your mouth if you need dentures or any sort of dental work. We use that for the horses because it's soft. It cures into a relatively firm, almost silly putty like consistency, which is again is going to put that positive pressure back on P3 and help to support the whole bony column of that limb. So we did that for the first two treatments. We started to see some positive growth, and then I glued the horse into these really cool 3D printed, they call them clogs or cuffs. Similar concept to the wooden clog, but a little bit more modern. And it's like a clear polyurethane base with like a removable wedge at the bottom so you can adjust the height of the wedge. Is when you wedge a laminated course, it can reduce the strain on the deep digital flexor tendon by up to 40%, which can be huge when you are working with a case of laminitis in order to prevent further tearing of the lamina within the dorsum of that foot. So we glued him into those, and we continued to have a lot of success. More dental impression material. The horse was trotting around like he hadn't trotted in years. We did unfortunately end up losing the horse. I think it was just, the cancer and a mix of that and the Cushing's. And one day he went down and there just was, we knew it was time. But so we worked on that for a good couple of months, but it was really cool to see kind of him start to improve again in a way. And I think maybe had he not have had that morbidity of the cancer, I think we probably could have gotten him through it. Luckily, he was a Morgan. They're really tough, hardy horses. I've dealt with a lot of donkeys, actually. Their feet really grow and distort when they have laminitis episodes. So of course, donkeys are native to the Middle East, Africa, that sort of thing. They are not the Mediterranean. They're not used to being in the U.S. in Europe, where we have very lush grazing and all this grass. They're used to surviving on a very almost browser-like kind of diet, like a goat or a deer, in the desert. So we bring them over here, we throw them out on pasture, they balloon up, they have metabolic dysregulation, insulin resistance, they founder, and their feet just distort and grow and turn out so weird. Like they're the almost like the cases that you see, like the very extreme neglect cases, where the feet that kind of corkscrew and turn
Mm.
into, some people might have heard of it described as like an elf shoe where they grow out and grow up. That is a sign of extreme and prolonged, unmanaged, chronic, almost constant bouts of laminitis. And just that neglect and the way that they grow back. I've done a lot of rehab with those where you just kind of look at the foot and you say, and in some of those cases, I don't have a vet, to work with. The owners might not have a vet. It might be a donkey that they purchased a decade ago to guard their sheep, and it has not worn a halter in 10 years. And it's lived out in the back 40, and it needs its feet trimmed. And we got to take off like 8 inches a foot without radiographs. So you just kind of, what I do anyway, I just try and envision how it should look and cut off whatever is not supposed to be there. Um, and that's always been pretty successful. But I've had a lot of rehab cases in those, and those are always really interesting. Like even just to watch them walk right after you trimmed them,
Yeah.
they don't have this huge lever out in front of them with all of that foot, and it's really interesting to see some of those rehab cases um, come around.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, is there any other advice that you'd want to give the students? Anything that maybe you did at Morrisville that kind of shaped your path, or anything you remember as being a really positive experience? This is a freshman class, so they're kind of at the beginning of their experience at Morrisville, but each of our guest speakers has kind of left them with like a little tidbit of something that they should be kind of thinking about focusing on, even though they are only in their freshman year.
Absolutely. I would say that definitely do as much as you can. Work with as many people as you can. Take really any opportunity that comes your way. If it's a good opportunity, of course, and it's a good situation, take that and take any learning opportunity you're given to work with a trainer, to work with somebody, to go groom at a horse show, to scribe at a horse show for a judge. Um, really take those times now while you can, because again, so much of it is that networking and who you're able to meet. And I think some people might be surprised where that might take them. One of the nice things about Morrisville is that they do have such a diverse equine program. So I would encourage everybody to try a different discipline. Take a riding lab, take the draft lab, I don't know if they still do the standardbred program, do the standardbred program. Um, take any electives that you can, take any opportunity that you can now to learn, because I don't think you'll ever have a greater chance to do that outside of SUNY Morrisville, which is really nice about being there. There are so many programs, and it is such a diverse school in that way. Um, really try and get linked up with somebody, especially if you want to go into a particular discipline or a particular breed, as a trainer. I think it's really important to do internships. It's really important to try and, again, that networking piece, to meet different trainers for different breeds. And um, you can never know too much, and you never stop learning, which is one nice thing about the horses, is that it's always different. And I always say we write all the books about them, but they never read them. So by doing that and by kind of taking those opportunities to travel, if you're given them, if you get an opportunity to go groom Morgan Gray National or Arabian U.S. Nationals or the Quarter Horse Congress or any of these big shows, and take it. Just go, get your foot in the door, see what's out there, see what you don't like even. Um, yeah, that's important too, to realize that this isn't quite for me. I didn't really like that experience, whatever the case might be. Um, and really just try and hone your craft as a horseman or a horsewoman. I think that's what's so important, and part of what really makes you as a good trainer and is able to make you work well with your vets and your farriers is if you really educate yourself on good conformation. That's a huge thing that we see in soundness, especially from a performance horse aspect, from a performance horse trainer. If you're out buying prospects for clients, knowing a good, healthy confirmation for that prospect, for that 2-year-old. A lot of things can change, but many times their legs that they're born with are what they're going to have their whole life. And I always say 90% of the legs come out of the mother. So I see a lot of lameness cases of horses with really bad conformation. And that's just what causes it. It is they are crooked legged, and those horses are sometimes being asked to do jobs they are not equipped for. You're not going to take, I don't know, your your big 17 hin warm blood and ask it to be a high level reining horse, just the same as you're not going to take your high level reining horse and you're going to ask it to turn around and be a Grand Prix show jumper. Certainly, if you go out, you buy a horse that has angular limb deformities or any sort of deviation of the limb. So much of a horse's soundness can come out of really from the knee below. Everybody always stops looking at the horse, I swear, like from like their chest up. Like, oh, it has a pretty head, it has a pretty neck, it has this, that's all fine and well. However, what is actually supporting the horse is just like building a house. You can have the prettiest, nicest house at the ground, at the surface level, but if your foundation is has a crack in it, is built on really sandy, swampy, wet, flooding, whatever ground, your house is not going to be stable long term. So I really, really impart on people to learn good conformation, particularly good limb conformation. That is so important. And again, I can't tell you the amount of horses I go out and I look at and they say, oh, well, she's lame. And it's like, well, your horse's foot turns out to the left about 45 degrees and you want to jump it. So I don't really know. I can't
There's
fix
not much I
that,
can do for that.
Exactly. Did you look? You don't even need a radiograph to see that. Did you look at the leg? That's the biggest thing. And is just learn your conformation, learn good horsemanship, good horse handling skills. Um, and that's probably the biggest thing is just really work on your horsemanship, work with those trainers, take internships, take opportunities to groom, to travel, to go to another part of the country and see how things are done. Go to a different breed. If you're a Western rider, go work at a saddle seat barn for a while. See something different. See how those horses are managed. And you learn something good and bad from everything that you do. And that is all I think like the sum total of that is what can make a really good successful horseman is by being, I mean, it's just like shoeing horses. You have to be under 1,000 of them before you know what you're really doing or feel like you know what you're really doing. The only ways to do it is by doing. So just dive in.
Yeah. Yeah, get out there and see everything and do everything. And that was great advice. See what you don't like, right? You might think you
Yeah,
want to be a vet until you see like your first surgery so
absolutely.
yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much. That was a great talk. I really appreciate you taking your time and meeting with me. So,
My
yeah,
pleasure. Thank you